So let's get started, sorry for that pause, with a poll. So tell us, how did you hear about this webinar? Did you hear about it on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, maybe Colorín Colorado, maybe an email or a colleague, through our website, or another way? So go ahead and type in your results and your choice here. And then next we'll get started with some tips for using our platform called Zoom. So we've had about 75% of you have voted. I'm going to end the poll and share our results. So you can see most of you found out about this webinar through an email. And I imagine it's that you're already on our Support Ed email list. So thank you for joining. So now before we get started, let's take a look at our online platform called Zoom, in case you're not familiar with it. So please take a moment to find your control bar, which is visible if you've downloaded Zoom. We'll be pausing for questions at the end of the presentation, and you'll use the Q&A button to ask those kinds of questions. You can enter a content-related question whenever you have one. And if you happen to experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat button to let us know. You can also use the chat button to connect with each other and comment on the webinar. Thank you. So our webinar agenda for today is our welcome from me, Diane Stair-Fenner. The next, my colleague Jill Kester will give her presentation on 6 considerations and examples, all related to text for English learners. Then Erica will share activities and practical strategies. We'll have a Q&A for about 10 minutes, and then we will wrap up at the end. And I do want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we'll share an archive with you tomorrow of the webinar by email. We're also happy to share a certificate of attendance to those of you who are here live today. And at the end of the presentation, I'll share a slide, and also we'll provide a link multiple times in the chat that you can use and download and print off your own certificate. So stay tuned till the end for that link. At Support Ed, we like to provide you with practical tools that you can use in your context. We'll give you a link to the webinar handout in your email. We gave you, sorry, a link to the webinar handout in your email today. And you can also find it on our website at getsupported.net/free tools. We'll also share a link to the handout several times in the chat today. Please go ahead and download the handouts, as you might like to refer to them as we go along today. We also hope you'll share these tools with your colleagues. We've also created a Padlet to share resources from today's webinar, and to also give you a chance to add your own resources to support ELL's access to complex text. Please note that this link is case sensitive. We'll also send out the link in today's chat in case you missed it. So our content today aligns with some of our chapters in our book called Unlocking English Learners' Potential, and we've highlighted those chapters here. So if you have a copy of the book, you might want to take a look at it after the webinar and see how what we're talking about matches up with the content of the book. And today's presenters, I would like to share a little bit of information about them. We'll start with Jill. So Jill Kester is a senior associate at Support Ed with more than 20 years of experience teaching students from kindergarten through 12th grade and leading teachers in English language education. She believes that supporting ELL's literacy and comprehension of complex text is key to their academic progress. And you can connect with her on Twitter at Jill L. Kester. Erica Daniels is an ENL instructional coach with the Syracuse City School District in New York. This is her second year as an instructional coach, and she previously taught ENL in 2 Syracuse elementary schools. Erica is currently working on her Certificate of Advanced Studies in Educational Leadership at Syracuse University. And you can connect with her on Twitter at eDanielsENL. So we hope that you're also following us and chatting with us on Twitter at SupportEDUC. And we'll be live tweeting this event as well. So we want to stress that collaboration is always one of the keys to English learner success. And we originally connected with Erica through our ongoing now 5-year collaboration with teachers in Syracuse. And here's a picture of both Erica and Jill. Erica is all the way on the left and Jill is third from the left. And they co-presented with the Syracuse ENL director and coaches, including Erica, who you'll see here. They just recently presented on literacy. And now Jill will share 6 considerations for making text accessible. Jill, if you're muted, please unmute.
Hi, are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, it looked like a headphone malfunction. All right, so let me start again. Here's an overview of the 6 considerations. We're gonna walk through them in more depth using the sample text that you'll find in your handouts. The first consideration is selecting and analyzing text. Secondly is building on the experience and knowledge of your English learners. Thirdly is pre-teaching or glossing vocabulary. Fourth is amplifying the language as needed, and we'll explain that and provide an example. Fifth is scaffolding readability. And sixth is supporting comprehension. All right, and here's a tool that's available in your handouts. If you haven't been able to download those, the link is at the top of the page here. And this just goes over the same 6 considerations and provides a little more detail on each. This is a great handout that you can use not only for your own lesson planning, but also a tool that you can share with colleagues. I know one of you, or maybe more of you, mentioned in the chat earlier that one of the things you'd like to get out of today's webinar is materials and ideas to share with your content area colleagues. So here is one. All right, a lot of what we're going to do will be modeled or explained using this sample complex text. This is from a 5th grade book published by National Geographic Learning. And we'll be referring to this frequently. So looking at this text, think about what do you notice that might support your English learners in accessing or understanding the complex text here. And please go ahead and type it in the chat so we can see what you're thinking. So one of the first things, I'll just go ahead and share a little bit. Yeah, okay, pictures. Yeah, pictures, captions are helpful. Bolded key vocabulary words. Yes, the heading, exactly. All right. So Diane, if you can advance and show the different things. There's definitely a title for this section. There's the image of plastic in the ocean that also has a caption. And bolded vocabulary words that are also reflected in the glossary. Great. Thank you. Yes, and simplified definitions for vocabulary. Right. All right, let's advance to the next slide. All right, now at the same time, this text has all those great features, but it may not be perfect for your English learners, right? It's impossible to find a text that matches your specific students' knowledge and skills exactly. So what additional supports might you want to add to support your English learners in comprehending this complex text? So please go ahead and share that in the chat again. Yeah, so it might be more of the same too. Some of you might want more pictures. Yes, more pre-teaching vocabulary with more images. Maps, exactly. The middle section talks about California, Hawaii, Texas. That would be really helpful to have that visual. Yes, background knowledge. Videos on background knowledge, sure. Instruction on tier 2 vocabulary, exactly. Yes, end up. is one of the things. It's in the first and second line, right? And chunking the information. Excellent, excellent. Okay, those are all great things, and they're all going to come up in the 6 considerations. So let's go ahead and continue. Yes, Realia. All right, we'll move on. Yes. All right, so the first consideration is both selecting your text and then analyzing it. And you know, as teachers, we have varying degrees of freedom when it comes to being able to select our text for our students, depending on all kinds of factors, including the curriculum. But what we can determine is which part of the passage we want to focus on, and then chunking it into manageable pieces, as some of you have mentioned in the chat already. And I know, especially with English language arts, you know, when you're on a very strict curriculum, some of those passages and stories are very long. So we need to find ways to chunk it and to shorten it, because if we're trying to cover all of it, we may not get to the heart of the really important learning opportunities for our Ls. All right, and I just wanted to add, as we go through the 6 considerations in more detail, you don't necessarily have to go in this order. That said, this first consideration is essential to do first, as it's laying the groundwork for all the rest of the considerations. All right. So here's a visual of the 4 different areas of academic language that you'll want to analyze and support your Ls with. So you can think of it in terms of layers. At the very center is the most obvious: vocabulary, right? We all, no matter what kind of teacher we all think about what are the words our students might need help with, right? Surrounding that is the grammar and syntax, which sometimes is more easy to spot when we see types of sentences that our Ls may struggle with. And then comes the discourse or organization level. And both the grammar and vocabulary depend on what's happening within the discourse. It's at a higher level, and also not quite as obvious or visible. So it's basically how we organize our language based on genre and modality. So for example, you might expect to encounter different discourse styles in a biology textbook than you would see or hear with casual conversations on the playground, for example. And all of this is governed within a socio-cultural context, which affects how we feel, how we interact with others, what we expect our students to say, and what they expect us to say. In addition, it's impacted by cultural backgrounds, both of our students and our own, and the overall context of the classroom. All right, and there's more specific information about all 4 of these levels in a document in your Padlet. So later when you have a chance, please look through the Padlet, as there's useful materials that we're not going to cover today that we've added to the Padlet. All right, so let's take a look at the word level analysis. A lot of these words are things that you've already brought up. The first is ending up, is an interesting 2-part verb that definitely is not easy to figure out for our Ls. Some other words that other teachers have pointed out from this text are masses. Trash, plastic, and garbage are all key to the main ideas of the text. And later on, you might want to think about explaining the word looks like, as that's key to understanding the simile there. Okay, so at the sentence level, often, like I mentioned before, there are patterns you might notice, and one pattern that some teachers have noticed with this text are the prepositional phrases that begin 2 different sentences. And in this case, they're used to signify location, from the surface but just below the surface. And so this may be something challenging for English learners who are expecting the sentence to start with a subject followed by a verb, right? And they're not quite used to this level of complexity. So this would be probably a great opportunity for a mini lesson if that's something you choose to focus on. All right, and at discourse level, and this is where it really gets fun, that very first sentence, here's what really shocks me, that might be something, you know, depending on your objectives that you might want to highlight or support for your Ls. it's first person voice. It feels kind of conversational or casual. There's also the circled sentences, which are topic sentences. And then later on, there are 2 similes. So that's, all of this depends on the level of your students and your teaching objectives and what you'd really want to highlight. In just a minute, we're going to take a closer look at the sociocultural or background knowledge level and think about what kind of background knowledge ELs might have that you can build on and what might be helpful to support in the next section. All right, now here is a tool. This is in your handouts. And this is something you can use and also share to help you just focus on those 4 areas of academic language, considering the demand that is placed on your English learners. What words, sentence patterns, discourse, and background knowledge might be potential challenges for your ELs? And what kind of scaffolds or instructional priorities might you want to build in to support your English learners? All right, so now we're going to go into background knowledge. And as I mentioned, it includes activating what students already have. And you might consider that prior knowledge, right? And then also building on background knowledge or schema. All right, so I've circled 3 different things here that might be potential areas for background knowledge to teach. One is and you mentioned this before, all the different locations that are talked about: California, Hawaii, and then Texas. Another area might be providing background information just about the food chain from plankton, and to kind of give them an idea how the plastic might be impacting the life of the ocean. And then another one, and I'm going to ask you in just a minute which of these you'd think you'd really want to focus on. And a third possible area is the snow globe. And just seeing a picture of it isn't really helpful if you don't have the concept of the snow moving around inside the globe. So you could bring in realia, as someone mentioned, and just give the students a show of that. So just very briefly, is there one of these background knowledge areas, or even a different one that you would address for your students? You can enter it in the chat. One thing I want to mention while you're typing is we want to keep background knowledge very concise. And I know as teachers and people who love knowledge and want to share knowledge, we sometimes are tempted to really delve deeply into background knowledge, but time's of essence, especially for our English learners. And so we need to think about what's essential and how can I get that across in the most effective, efficient way. All right, so location of places, excellent. Food chain, plankton, right. Ocean layers and the currents. Yeah, I think, these gyres that are these circling areas of currents where the plastic is collecting, and there's more than just one, just for your information, but that might be a really important concept to go into. Yeah, I see a lot of you have talked about maps, geography, recycling. Excellent. All right. Yeah, nobody picked the snow globe. That was kind of a distractor. You could bring in a real snow globe and, just have it in the classroom, and students can, very easily, quickly, at any time during the day, get that concept really fast too. All right, so let's move on to the next consideration, pre-teaching vocabulary. And this involves both identifying the words that you want to pre-teach and then how you will introduce them. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. This is a great resource, which we've also added to Padlet. The little folded origami icon in the corner lets you know that this will be found in Padlet. And this resource that was geared towards elementary and middle school, but is actually very, very applicable for English learners at the high school level as well, suggests going into or focusing on words that are key to understanding the text, right? There are a lot of interesting words that we might want to focus on, but we really need to get the most bang for the buck, like they say. So find those keywords. And secondly, the words that are frequently used, and words that they're going to see, students will see across disciplines. The general academic vocabulary, you've mentioned that in the chat, talking about tier 2 words. Those are really key. And I know we gravitate, and our textbooks gravitate towards the tier 3 nouns mainly, and that's great, but there's a lot more that RLs are going to need. And then finally, there are words that have multiple meanings that the students may have come across, in an everyday context, but they need to learn the academic context. One example would be the word plate, when talking about the plates that we eat on versus tectonic plates or platelets in the blood, things like that. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so when it comes time to it, we need to pick, according to this research and a lot of other research, we need to pick a small group of vocabulary words that we're going to teach in depth for our Ls. And recycle, give them multiple opportunities to be exposed to and to use, using all 4 modalities with these keywords. So, and then there are other words that you might just want to explain quickly with a picture, with a cognate. If your students are Spanish or French speakers or other languages that share a lot of cognates with English, maybe even a synonym or a glossary. Some of those can be, just explained really quick, and they don't need to be an in-depth vocabulary word. In the box below, I just pulled out some words from the text. Some of these you might want to consider teaching in depth, and some you might just want to explain quickly, and others the students might be able to figure out from the context. So for example, for snow globe, that's already explained in the glossary. There's a picture of it. Give them that opportunity to kind of wrestle with it first before you provide additional support. All right. The consideration number 4 is amplifying language. So we're really moving away from simplifying language for students. I know in the past, I as well would rewrite sometimes the text and make it what I thought was simpler and more easily accessible. But what happens when we do that is that we're removing the very useful connecting words that really help these short sentences make sense together in a larger context. And also, when we simplify language, we're removing a lot of cognates, a lot of those verbs that we might think we're making more simple, or we're actually making it more difficult by removing words that are cognates. And we're also robbing students of exposure to more rigorous academic language. And I know some of you have mentioned the need to work with your almost exiting Ls, and that need to really gain more access to grade level academic text. So let's look at the next slide, and this is an example of amplified text. This comes from a book, Inside Out and Back Again, and basically it's the same exact text, but it's embedded the definitions or additional meanings to the words. So it's providing that. And additionally, I built in a picture glossary on the right as well, just to provide more support for students. All right. And you may be wondering, that's a lot to do. Do I need to spend a lot of time retyping the text that's already there? Well, you don't have to. You can also build in the margin definitions. If you are comfortable with or have permission to photocopy some of your texts, you can add those in, or you can use, a PowerPoint or some kind of electronic way to amplify your text, as I did in this example. All right, 5th consideration is scaffolding readability. And this is really looking at the text features that are already there and adding to them if you feel like you need more text features. So looking at the National Geographic text, there's a lot of text features already there with the arrows indicating them. We've already discussed a lot of those. But you may be wishing there was more here, and you've already mentioned a few of the things. One thing I would like to add is, some visuals. So, to give the students a size of what Texas really looks like. How large is it? And what plankton looks like. And then additionally, this is a lot of text with no subheaders, so I was thinking it might be helpful for some students to add in subheaders. And you could even have them match the subheader with the paragraph that it goes with. So we've got swirling masses of trash for the first paragraph, the Great Eastern Pacific Garbage Patch for the second, and finally, the importance of awareness for the third. And the final consideration is supporting comprehension. And this really looks at developing scaffolded text-dependent questions, or TDQs, that really draw L's attention to the key concepts and parts of the text that they need, and then also supporting their responses. TDQs can be designed to align with the 3 close reads. So first, you can develop TDQs that help support key ideas and details. Secondly, is craft and structure. And finally, integrating knowledge and ideas. I'll share one example with you. The other 2 are in the Padlet. And here's the question. This would really help make sure my L's can find in the text and explain what is this Great Eastern Pacific Garbage Patch. And to help them respond, to really reduce that linguistic load, I've created a sentence frame so they don't have to rewrite or come up with all of those words, which, as we know, can take time for students who may not be as adept with handwriting. But this is still a question and answer that they can't just guess. They have to go back to the text for it. And then finally, this is an example of an additional scaffold that we could provide, a word bank and an image that can support those questions. And this is a tool I'm going to leave you with. This follows all 6 considerations. In the second column, it lists resources, and in the third column, you can develop your lesson plan there. And at the end, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Let's take a quick poll. So which of these 6 considerations that we've gone over pretty quickly are you interested in exploring more deeply or sharing with colleagues? Go ahead and check 1 or more boxes of what you're interested in. Is it analyzing the language demands, building on background knowledge, vocabulary, amplifying language, scaffolding readability, or supporting comprehension with TDQs? All right, and here we have results. Oh, our winner is scaffolding readability. Interesting, that's great. And second is amplifying language. Neat. So if you have any ideas that you want to share about those 2 or other items, please do so in the chat and also on Padlet. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to turn it over to Erica, who will tell us about activities and strategies.
Thank you so much, Jill. So at this point, I'll share some of the really great things that teachers here in Syracuse City School District are using to support their multilingual learners and how they're accessing complex texts. So our district recently released a new strategic plan, and within that strategic plan, one of the priorities is creating a culturally responsive curriculum and really culturally sustaining practices. So one way that our district is giving students access to rigorous text is by allowing them to use their full range of linguistic and cultural resources. So in another sense, we don't want to just develop literacy skills in English, but we want to use all of the students' assets to develop biliteracy and to help them maintain their cultural identity. So in the next few slides, we'll discuss how to use some of these approaches in terms of complex text. So here, teachers are creating an environment that allows emergent bilinguals to really make connections between their heritage language and the one that they're learning, which is English. So in the images, you can see here that teachers give students access to essential vocabulary by providing pictures, definitions, and heritage language supports. And I think it's important to note that both of these pictures are really student-centered. So the students are at the center of creating those words. Students or teachers rather, are not Googling how to say contribute in Kizigwa. Rather, they're having students come up and engage to highlight, to really build on their linguistic competencies. So grappling with complex text is really difficult for all of our students really, but for ELS particularly, without having that outside context. And so translanguaging is kind of the process of making meaning by using all of your language resources. And so some ways that teachers in the Syracuse City School District have utilized translanguaging for students to access complex texts include kind of grouping students by heritage language and giving them opportunities to engage with each other, to discuss text at length in their heritage language, and then kind of bring that back to English. And so the idea is that by emphasizing both languages in a positive light, it allows children to learn new concepts and creates a really welcoming and validating learning environment. So Jill talked a lot about the importance of building background, and I know in the poll some people talked about utilizing some video clips to kind of build that background knowledge. So here, this activity comes from the curricular resource that our district uses for English language development. And before launching a unit on justice and engaging with texts about the Underground Railroad, students would watch a short video clip that's kind of up in the left-hand corner is a screenshot of it. And then after the video, students would have an opportunity to think about their own lives, experiences that they've had that are either fair or ways that they have experienced injustice. This is kind of an opportunity for students to really build personal connections to rigorous text and then utilize vocabulary that they're going to encounter in the text. Up on the top right, that scale of justice is an anchor chart that ideally would be used for kids to continuously interact with during reading, so they can add ideas to it. So this is another before reading strategy. So we've got lots of front loading going on here. Predicting sort of feeds our natural curiosity about what we're going to read. So here, students in small groups would utilize these images that are part of the text on the Underground Railroad to help them make predictions. So they're going to use what they see and what they know already to make predictions or inferences about what the text will be about. And here in this activity, it really supports student collaboration and oral language discourse around texts that are difficult. So here in this activity, students will generate questions. And generating questions while reading is really important for ELS as a way to improve their comprehension and kind of monitor their comprehension. It kind of sets the tone and gives students a purpose for what they're going to be reading. So in this strategy, students use text features to develop questions that they will answer as they read. So you can see circled is the heading Underground Heroes, and perhaps students could come up with the question, who were the heroes of the Underground Railroad? So they know that that's what they're looking for, that sets a purpose for their reading. Again, they could utilize the image to develop a question as well. Why was it dangerous to help enslaved people? And you could even ask, kind of qualitative questions like, how do you think these people felt about their work? This strategy could be modeled first, and as their language skills improve, ELS would develop an awareness of their own cognitive process and then start to be able to do it on their own or independently. So this image comes from one of our middle school teachers, and this is an example of one of her students' work. So she calls this strategy the 4 C's. So students, this is good for a text that students can interact with, so it wouldn't be great for a textbook. But students, when they have a text in front of them on paper, they would count and number each paragraph so that they could refer back to those, kind of as a way to chunk the text. Color is where they would highlight key details. Circle was what they would do to unfamiliar words or vocabulary words. And then lastly, the 4th C is code. And code can mean many different things. So students could make notes in the margin using specific symbols. So I know some teachers will, if a student has a question, they'll ask them to put a question mark in the margin. Here, students could illustrate their meaning using pictures. So the student draws the space race with kind of the flags of the Soviet Union and the United States. And they could also utilize their heritage language, which also occurs here. So you'll see students have written in Nepali the word for some of the key vocabulary. So this is an interactive activity that would be done kind of following reading to monitor comprehension. So after a student's read some grade level text that describes the food chain, students would demonstrate their understanding and utilize their language skills by being given a photograph. And on the photograph is a component of the food chain. And then students would arrange themselves to show the transfer of energy, which is what they read about in the text that's displayed living links. Once they have arranged themselves correctly, according to the food chain, they would share what it is, the picture is that they're holding, using that language frame. So it might sound something like, this is a worm, it is a decomposer, I know this because it breaks down dead plants and animals. I think that this is a nice strategy because it sort of utilizes all of the different domains of language in an effort to comprehend complex text. So this chart comes from the book Excellence Every Day, and the source is at the bottom of the page there. It's a book study that we're doing with our entire ENL staff. We used Diane's book last year. So here, after reading, you could utilize these linguistic frames to support students in using successful structures to make claims about characters. So the examples above I like because it represents kind of tiered support that would increase in complexity. And we know that sometimes language frames aren't enough and students need a little bit more support. So perhaps your lower proficiency students may demonstrate their understanding of characters and character traits by illustrating how the character showed a particular trait or changed. So it may just be a drawing. And here is an example of kind of like a comic strip of how the character in this story shows perseverance. Students may need to reference a word bank of character traits. And I don't know about your students, but mine love to say that they are good, that they're nice, they're smart, but we really want to elevate the language that they're using. So this anchor chart here is a really good resource to help build students' language complexity. Okay, and the last strategy that I'm going to share today is this comes from our high school setting. This class that you're looking at are students in a sheltered global classroom. So students have just finished reading a complex text about ancient civilizations, and so now they're writing to respond to that text. So here what the students do is each student is responsible for a different component of a larger paragraph. So we would have one student that's going to write the claim, maybe two students that come up with evidence to support the claim, and then one person that would explain that evidence, and perhaps another student that would offer a conclusion statement. Excuse me. And so for accountability, students would use different color markers to indicate which part of the paragraph was theirs. And this is a really fun interactive activity that gives kids an opportunity to respond to some of that really difficult reading that they've just done.
So thank you, Erica, for your presentation with all of those wonderful examples. And I really love seeing the photos of teachers and kids in action in Syracuse. So now we have time for some questions. And as I shared earlier, so please go ahead and use the Q&A feature to ask questions. So especially think about, do you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about making complex text accessible to ELs? And also, just as a reminder, we do have the Padlet, and share your takeaways and resources on our Padlet, and you can see the link, Text for ELs Padlet. So let me go ahead. We've had a few questions come in as the presentations have been going. So I'll go ahead and get started with some questions, but please go ahead and type in your questions now as well. So Paulina asks, how could I make text accessible for entering or newcomer ELs in a co-taught class, especially text or chapter books that are pre-selected and native language or translated copies are not optional? So Jill or Erica, do you have an answer for that question?
Sure. I think one of the things that Erica just shared with us that involved group work and breaking down the activities so that different students are responsible for different parts can be really effective for co-taught classes with, students of many different language proficiencies. And there's a lot of value in having students work in groups with their peers. Research shows that they learn so much more and retain more from their peers than they do from us, as well as there'll be a lot of great language modeling, and they can get some support in their home language too, if you're able to match them up strategically that way. And also, one thing that I like to do too, especially with text, is come up with a few simple sentences that kind of summarize the main points or the steps, and then work with the newcomers to really understand those and to be able to manipulate them. If you're working on cause and effect, you can manipulate the sentences that way, or sequence, however they're used in the text to really help them get the main idea and understand some of the language too.
Great, thank you. I'll ask, go ahead, Erica, did you want to respond as well?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of add to what Jill was saying by a lot of repetition about what's happening within the text. So those key points that are happening in the text that are essential for students to understand, offering those in a lot of different ways. So repeating them frequently, having the students repeat it, whether it's in the heritage language or in English, having it written down for students to refer to, I think is a really great strategy for those really challenging books.
Great, thank you. And Katie Van Epps asked, do you recommend teaching or previewing the words prior to reading or during?
Right. I think that's a really complex question. So, and I'm really glad you asked it, because I feel like, we covered a lot in a short amount of time, so we can go a little more in depth here. So it really depends on what the words are, if they're essential for understanding the main ideas of the text. And also, you'd want to start with a pre-assessment too. And we didn't really talk about that, but it's important to find out what your students know and what they might need support with. And in addition, are the words, is the definition embedded? Are there enough context clues embedded? So if that's the case, we don't want to take away that opportunity for our L's. So in those cases, I definitely move away from previewing. And in classes like math, we've really moved away from pre-teaching words and really just teaching them the meaning in the context. But sometimes in terms of background knowledge or other words that you might be able to pre-teach, there's a reason for that too, especially if you're able to work with a small group of L's who might need that extra support right before they go to, an inclusion class. So there's times when you want to teach during the reading, and then other times when you might want to pre-teach the vocabulary.
Thank you. And Patrick writes, how can some of the activities apply to mixed classes? I find that with extremely low students, there are significant barriers for them to express those ideas, even with language frames, etc.
I think the activity you're referring to is the one with the scales of justice. And that was actually done in a mixed level class. I did that with my group of fifth graders a few years ago. And I think it works best in a mixed setting. So you can have some of your higher proficiency level students kind of model the language, whereas maybe the lower proficiency students, if they don't have the language to express something that was fair to them or an injustice that they experienced, maybe they could demonstrate their understanding by, placing their friend's answer on that scale, whether it's just or unjust. Or you could display a photograph or an image of something that demonstrates justice, and the student could determine then, is that an activity or is that an experience of justice or injustice?
Great, thank you. And Jolene Bowser asks, when we scaffold readability and support students in class, what strategies do you have for when students have to read independently? So strategies for independent reading.
Well, I think the 4Cs activity that Erica did, any of these activities, especially like that one, could be modeled and done whole class, small group, and eventually, ideally, independently as well. Because I think, Jolene, you bring up a really good point, is that we want students to be able to use all of these reading and comprehension skills independently, right? They're not always going to have us with them. And so, just starting to, doing a lot of mini lessons using all the different text features and how those provide information to us, and just practicing those with students and slowly kind of doing the gradual release of responsibility so that they are using those independently.
I might also just add that when students are English language learners, when they're faced with complex text, that's kind of something that we are doing with them and grappling through with them. And then when they go and do it independently, perhaps at that point they could read something that's more on their grade level, or their reading level rather. So they could use those same strategies, those same skills that they've been working with the grade level text. Then when they go to do it independently, perhaps they're doing it with a little bit of a lower level text.
Thank you. We have two more questions at the moment. One is from Kim Bishop, who's asking for quality resources to identify or list Tier 2 words.
This might be a good question to pose to all of our wonderful participants too. You might have resources that we're not even aware of that you're using in your schools and your districts that you'd like to share. One of the resources that someone asked about just a little bit ago was support with vocabulary. So this will cover Tier 2 as well as Tier 3, but in other languages when you're talking about translanguaging. So there's a great resource through Steinhardt University in New York that shares all kinds of vocabulary for various courses, grade levels in a multitude of languages. And I can share that again in the chat. But that's one resource that's really helpful. It's not just tier 2, but it is a good resource.
Great.
Yeah, and I see that Charlotte mentioned Excel by Margarita Calderon. She has a good framework for teaching tier 2 vocabulary. Yeah, that whole program can be really helpful.
Great. And finally, Michelle asks, if we are responsible for staff development sessions, is there a pre-assessment that we could do school-wide for staff to see which consideration is the best to focus on first?
I think maybe even just a survey would be helpful, although, it's helpful you might want to share the webinar and see, and then have them just get an introduction to all 6 so that they'll really know what they're responding to when you ask them what would you like more training on. That might be helpful. But I think that's a great idea to use that as a launching pad for staff development. It could be really helpful.
Great. Well, that brings us to the end of our questions. If we don't have any more, I'll kind of, give you a little bit of a wait time to type in any more as they come up. And I'll just share a couple of more slides. And thank you to everyone for asking those questions as well. So thanks again for participating in our webinar today. So developing literacy and accessing complex text, there's some of the topics we offer in our face-to-face and blended professional development to support ELs and their teachers. So you can take a look at our website for more information on getsupported.net. And also, we'd like to share that we're offering 4 of our popular PD courses, and we're adding a new course on culture this summer. We encourage you to take a look after this webinar. So all of our courses are co-facilitated by best-selling book authors and EL experts and have an interactive PLC at their core. So you'll earn a certificate for 10 hours of professional development upon successful completion. And starting the summer, we also have a new graduate credit option with Trinity Washington University in Washington, D.C., where you can earn 1 graduate credit per 10-hour course. And participants from New York can also get a CTLE certificate because we're CTLE providers. So take a look on our website to learn more. And as promised, here's the link for you to download a certificate of attendance and add your name on it. So you would type in bit.ly/May30WEB, all in caps. So you can type that in to download your fillable certificate of attendance for 1 hour of PD. And I know that we're sharing that link in the chat as well. So we hope you take advantage of that. So on behalf of Jill, Erica, and all of us at SupportEd, thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. We'll send you a recording of the webinar within 24 hours and also some of the materials again from today. So thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of your day.